thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Ron Deutsch. I'm working with New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness, and I'm joined here today by some of the leaders from both labor and the faith community. We're lucky enough to have with us today leaders who have been working for social and economic justice for a very long time in this state. And I should know because I've been around for a long time too. So we're lucky enough to have with us today President Mario Cilento from the New York State AFL-CIO, the Reverend Tanya Spencer, who's the pastor at Good Shepherd Community of Faith in Buffalo, Henry Garrido, who's the president of DC 37, the Reverend Michael Livingston, who is the interim senior minister at the Riverside Church in New York City, Andy Pallotta, the president of New York State United Teachers, and the Reverend Peter Cook, who's the executive director of the New York State Council of Churches. So I'm just going to start us off here today. Again, thanking everybody for participating. I want to let any of the reporters who are a part of our participant list, please raise your hand after our speakers are done to ask any questions that you might have. But we are all here today very united in the sense that what we're focused on here today is to make sure that people know that we support the one house budgets that have been advanced, in particular around many of the fair share progressive revenue raising options that have been outlined in those budgets. So we're very excited that the Senate and Assembly have put forward a variety of different progressive revenue raising options that would ask the wealthy to pay their fair share in New York State. We are thrilled that Washington is coming through with additional aid for New York, but we are cognizant of the fact that this is short-term aid. This is only going to help us throughout the next year or so. And then we're going to be right back into the same situation that we were in the past. We are still facing tens of billions of dollars in budget gaps in the out years as we look toward the future. We don't want to see the state kick the can down the road just because we got some additional aid from Washington. We have to make sure that we have sustainable revenue streams into the future so that we can continue to fund the services that New Yorkers are relying on, and also fund services for New Yorkers who are struggling as a result of this pandemic. So, rather than catering to the needs of the already well-off few, we think it's time that the state look towards funding the programs and services that have gone underfunded for the last decade now, at least, if not longer for sure. Then we need to make sure that we're funding these long-term investments. And we also know that some have come out in opposition to these, whether it's folks in the business community or others, and we can address some of that as well. But to start us off, I'd like to kick it over to the president of the AFL-CIO, Mr. Mario Cilento.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you very much. This, for the labor movement, this is about a really, as Ron sort of alluded to, this is about a structural realignment of our tax system. Just like when you're building a home, if the foundation is sound, the structure of that house is secure for years to come. And if we have a strong, sensible tax infrastructure, our economic infrastructure in the state will be secure for the long term. Because let's not forget, and this is really the most important point I think I can make today. When the economy was strong last year before the pandemic hit, and the stock market was rising to record levels before the pandemic hit, and by the way, it's still doing very well, we still had to deal with proposed cuts to Medicaid and other public services. And also keep in mind, we've reduced our state workforce by about 14,000 over the past decade. So even though we're getting federal funding, as Ron alluded to, which will help us deal with the budget gap this year, we still have a faulty tax structure. For long-term purposes, we still need a more fair tax system. And that's why the labor movement believes that the wealthiest among us need to pay more of a fair share. So not only are we able to withstand future downturns or unexpected catastrophes that we're still living in right now, right? But even more important, we ensure that our state can provide vital public services we all rely on day after day, week after week, year after year, in the good times as well as the bad. It's about having the peace of mind that these services exist, as well as a better tangible quality of life for these services that they provide. Because the reality is this: no matter if you're making $30,000 a year, or if you're making $200,000, $300,000, or if you're making $2 million a year, we all need to educate our children, no matter the economic climate. We need to provide health care for all New Yorkers every single day. We need to provide child care at adequate levels. We need to provide transportation that takes us all to our jobs and to school and to our doctor's appointments and to see our families. We need to be able to have provide sanitation services so that we don't live in filth. We need to have to ensure that our roads and our bridges and our tunnels that we all use every day don't crumble as we're using them. We need to feel safe and secure that law enforcement is there to protect us. We need to have fire departments and EMS services ready at a moment's notice. And we need these things without the thought or the dread that they may not exist to the extent that we need them from year to year. And that's the New York we all want to live in. That's the New York we all deserve to live in. And just to be clear, as Ron pointed out, we are not looking at a one-time fix here. We need recurring revenue so that we don't have to cut services or jobs down the line to meet projected budget deficits of anywhere from $5 billion to $10 billion over the next few years. Because if you're going to cut services, you're not only reducing the standard of living and the quality of life in this state, right? You are also cutting tens of thousands of jobs. Those men and women are out of work. This state then loses again, right? There's a residual loss here because those men and women who are out of work, we don't collect their income taxes. Also, they're out of work. They don't have any discretionary income to spend at local businesses. They don't go to the movies. They don't go to dinner on a Saturday night. They don't go and buy extra clothes for their kids. They have the bare necessities. So our small businesses are hurt as well. So it's not just working men and women. It's working men and women, small businesses, even those with the wealthiest among us. If you're a real estate developer and you own a condo in the best parts of Manhattan, and you have to sell that condo for $2 million, $5 million, right? How likely is it that you sell that condominium for $5 million if the street in front of your building is filled with trash, and the school 2 blocks down the road, which is usually pretty well staffed, is now short staffed, and the hospital a half mile down the road that's usually top notch has a reduction in services? The reality is you're probably not selling that $5 million condo anymore. So everybody has a stake in this. It's not just working men and women. Yeah, we have an outsized stake in it because there's more of us than there are the multimillionaires and the billionaires. And that's the point of this whole argument. But the reality is every single New Yorker, from those making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to small businesses across this state, to the very wealthiest among us, we all have a stake in making sure that we maintain a standard of living and a quality of life that we can all be proud of and that we can all live in, that allows us to live our days in prosperity. So that's why we need a fair tax infrastructure in this state. Thank you, Ron.
I'd like to turn it over to Reverend Tanya Spencer, who is the pastor at Good Shepherd Community of Faith in Buffalo. Thank you for joining us today, Reverend Spencer.
Thank you for having me this morning. I just wanted to talk for a moment. You know, since we've been in this pandemic, things have significantly changed in Buffalo. We did not have a pantry, and now we do. And we are seeing a growing number of people who were once working and thriving, who are now trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from. Yes, I believe that everybody is responsible for looking out for each other. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. But to say and to try to put in place something that is short term for a year, 2 years is unreasonable. Right now, the short term with the stimulus, what comes out to about $150 a month per person for those that have received it. Who can survive off of that? No one. And so I think to put in place programs to help people to live sustainable lives moving forward, not just for right now, is something that we all need to be involved in. You know, my prayer is that we get over ourselves and come together and realize that we are in this together. There is power in unity. And so I would like to see this proposal passed to help the people, because they are suffering really bad here. And I can only speak for Buffalo. And so I know if it's here in Buffalo, I know that it's statewide. You know, we need to do better. And doing better is working together and trying to figure out some long-term sustainability for New York.
Well, thank you, Reverend Spencer. Appreciate your remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Henry Garrido, president of DC 37.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Henry Garrido. I'm the executive director of DC 37. Thanks, Ron. And I want to take a moment to speak about essential workers, because if there's one shining line about the crisis of this pandemic, is that people have recognized the that essential workers had to make in order to keep New Yorkers safe and to keep the city going under an extraordinary time. And as a result of that, many of them paid with their own lives. As of last January, more than 386 people have applied for death benefit, or families, I should say, for death benefit on the COVID-19 under the NICE system alone. That includes the other pension system. That would raise the number of city workers who have died as a result of COVID-19 to more than 500. And as is often said, there's no light without darkness. And the reward that they received as a result of their heroism was the proposed layoff for 22,000 city workers. Now, unions like myself and the United Federation of Teachers stepped up and came up with $1 billion in savings last year in order to prevent the layoffs of 22,000 workers here in the city. That agreement expires June 30th of this year. And while the stimulus money provides enough resources for the layoff agreement to be extended to 1 more year, here's a bad reality that people may not know. The January plan here for New York City had a decline of 8,200 positions of city workers who have left, retired, or who will not be backfilled because of the economic downturn. The following year has about 5,400 essential workers who will not be backfilled because there's not enough resources. We cannot afford to do that. We've been through this road before after September 11, and we saw depletion and diminution of essential workers, and then we were not ready for the next emergency. We need a fair system, a fair tax system that fund those workers, those frontline workers, that protects many of them who have sacrificed their lives. And I've often said, and I close with this, that a budget is a statement of values, and it's a statement of priorities. If you believe that essential workers are important, that they're not just important to be giving a certificate in paper, you will make sure that the budget has enough resources to fund those workers. And now, if you care about the billionaires of the city of New York, then you want to make sure that they're taken care of. So this is a real call to action to our lawmakers and to New Yorkers to promote a tax fair system that since 2018, since former President Trump passed away, has been really hit a high of inequality here in New York. So we stand strong here with the coalition, and we support the fair tax system that would increase and provide funding for essential workers. Thank you.
Thank you, President Garrido. I'm going to turn it over to the Reverend Michael Livingston, who's the interim senior pastor at the Riverside Church in New York City. Reverend Livingston.
Thank you very much. It's an honor, really, for me to be here among these faith leaders and union leaders. All we're doing is repeating what one another is saying. You hear it over and over again. Perhaps it'll sink in, and perhaps we'll see action where we need to see it. Our city and state, New York City, New York State, are great by almost any measure, except we're failing in the most fundamental of measures, and that's how we treat the most vulnerable people among us. And the most vulnerable among us fall into a broad range of demographics: the young, the elderly, the working yet poor, people of color, to just begin to name the people who could prosper if we did not systemically, Mario got that right, this is about structural changes, if we did not systemically favor those who are already wealthy beyond what most of us can even imagine. It is unethical to tolerate the gross economic inequities that exist among the people of this state for any reason, much less out of fear that we might be abandoned by the wealthy among us. It's unethical to tolerate workers whose full-time work does not afford them a living wage in this wealthiest of cities in the world. It is unethical for us to protect those who are already wealthy and leave unprotected the most vulnerable among us. In any season of the year, a society that cares about its people, has a government that is, as our founding documents say, of and by and for the people. In any season of the year, such a government will act to meet the needs of people struggling to pay bills, to educate their children, to make rent, to care for basic health needs, to find even simple pleasures in a year like this one of devastating losses. In this season of Lent, at the beginning of Holy Week, the Christian community remembers a citizen of the world who lived and died with love for all, especially the most vulnerable. We celebrate his memory by calling on our legislators to approve a budget that asks the wealthiest among us to pay just their fair share, to raise revenue that ensures long-term sustainability and offers much needed relief to the many among us simply struggling to keep up. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Livingston. Next, we'll hear from President Andy Pallotta from New York State United Teachers.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for being here today, everyone. I'm inspired already listening to the words that have been shared by our friends in the faith community, and I'm here to talk about the NYSET members and what they have been through when everything shut down a year ago. It wasn't just a matter of pivoting on a dime to remote learning, which they did. They continued to prepare meals and deliver food to students who needed it. They took it upon themselves to go to homes and work with the students in their driveways. They held graduation parades to celebrate with students. They've shown the same dedication to their students this year as they have in previous years, and they've been able to pull off simultaneous instruction as well as remote instruction. So they've navigated this entire crisis, and I want to say that they do want to be in person with their students. In the latest stimulus package the federal government delivered, it gives significant resources to New York schools, colleges, and hospitals. That includes billions to help reopen more classrooms safely with the PPE that is needed, ventilation improvements, COVID testing that is needed. This is immensely helpful. But this is a one-shot and short-term solution in a most pressing crisis. We have to look in the years to come, the future, and what will be done to support our students, but also at the social and emotional issues that they are dealing with during this time. We also need to recognize that the state of New York has shortchanged public education for years. New York still owes $3.8 billion to schools around this state from foundation aid. Mental health needs, cuts to AP and elective courses, a lack of English language learner courses, and other critical needs were there before the pandemic and are only exacerbated by the pandemic. And here's the kicker. It's difficult to address chronic underfunding plus additional costs when we're looking at tens of billions of out-year dollars being in the gap. So before we had this entire world turned upside down, we had something called Fund Our Future. Fund Our Future being something that was long past due. None of us here today are talking about taxing the middle class, working class people. We're talking about billionaires and ultra millionaires who saw their wealth actually grow during the pandemic. They've made more money. They clearly can afford to pay their fair share toward the services for the disadvantaged, for the working class. And even the ultra rich, as we've heard today, will benefit from this. We agree with the other speakers here today that the legislature has put forth a set of progressive tax reform proposals. We need to applaud them for showing such bold leadership. And our message is clear. During these final days of negotiating this budget, we have to help fund this future for our great state, address these wild economic disparities that existed for so many years and are now even worse. Do what's right for our K-12 and college students, for our public hospital patients, and for all New Yorkers. Ask the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share and move this great state forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Next, and our final speaker is the Reverend Peter Cook, someone I've been working a very long time with on budget justice issues. He is the Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches. Reverend Cook.
Thank you, Ron, for that introduction. And I just want to say that it's good to be with our friends from labor in addressing the massive wealth inequality in our state. Labor leaders and clergy have fought together starting in the Gilded Age in the late 19th century, when wealthy industrialists made massive amounts of wealth at the expense of workers. Together, we advocated for workers and helped them recapture some of that wealth made possible by the exploitation of their labor. And today, we live in a new Gilded Age where the gaps between rich and poor are greater than ever. And so we need to work together, again, to fight structural economic injustice. Communities and workers across New York are hurting because the state has been underfunding its state budget for far too long. The austere 2% spending cap has been killing us socially and economically. We have suffered from stark budget austerity during this pandemic. And because of chronic state underfunding, New Yorkers are spending far too high a percentage of their income on the basic costs of food, childcare, education, healthcare, rent, and property taxes. And meanwhile, there is an increasing number of New York billionaires who saw their wealth increase by over $156 billion during the pandemic. We hear the wealthiest among us whine, as they have for over a century, that they're already paying far too much in taxes. This is New York's big lie, which must be debunked at every turn. In fact, even after the federal limitations placed on the SALT deduction, the wealthiest are paying the lowest overall taxes on their wealth and income of anyone, sometimes less than the taxes paid by a school teacher or a small or medium-sized business. The wealthiest complain that taxing them a dime more will cause them to leave the state. This is another falsehood. Indeed, we have seen sizable increases in the number of millionaires and billionaires in New York before and during the pandemic, not fewer. To be sure, there are people leaving the state, but it's not rich people. It's lower and middle class people who suffer because of the state's unwillingness to tax the wealthy appropriately, combined with chronic underspending and regressively high property and sales taxes and fines and fees. Our economy will not get stronger by letting the wealthiest and big corporations get away with paying less taxes than most of us. What will make our economy strong is to invest in state spending and reduce the property tax burden so that families have more and not less money to spend in the economy. Big business in the long term does not run on tax breaks. They run on customers who have resources to buy their products. Businesses and their customers stay in New York because of the state's investment in the quality of life, which make people want to stay here and contribute to our economy. As a state, we must not return to the Gilded Age, where a few made massive profits at the expense of workers and small and medium-sized shopkeepers. We need to invest in our state, and that means calling on the wealthy to give back a fraction of their massive tax windfall to invest in our state and our people. We need to embrace a biblical spirit of abundance and not worship the false god of scarcity. So please, we call on the Assembly and the Senate to hold the line and maintain $7 billion in new taxes in the state budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Great wrap up there. I just want to highlight the fact that obviously, you know, between the labor community and the faith community, these folks represent millions of New Yorkers, you know, and poll after poll has shown those very same New Yorkers support higher taxes on those with the most in our society. 90% of New Yorkers in two separate polls, both pre and post-pandemic, supported increasing taxes on the wealthiest among us because they know, whether they know it, you know, innately or they know it from reading and studying this issue, that the wealthy are doing exceptionally well right now, and our tax system is screaming out for reform. Comptroller DiNapoli just pointed out that Wall Street bonuses are up 10% this year. Wall Street and the financial sector are doing very well during this pandemic. As noted, New York's billionaires saw their incomes increase by about $156 billion since the start of this pandemic. Also, you know, we know that some businesses have been doing well as well during the pandemic. You know, there have been some that have come out against increasing taxes on businesses. But when you look at the proposals that are being put forth, you have to realize that, you know, these taxes and changes in the corporate tax rate really only impact businesses with incomes over $5 million. This is not your small mom and pop shop that we're talking about here. These are big businesses. And they're looking at increasing the rate in New York from 6.5 to 9.5%, which is still below neighboring New Jersey, which is 11.5%, and Pennsylvania, which is around 10%. So there's certainly room here Not to mention these very same corporations just got a 40% corporate tax cut from the federal government under the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So again, as Peter also noted, New York has the greatest income inequality of any state in the nation. We have more billionaires than anywhere else in the world. And the notion of millionaire migration as a concern is an overblown myth, and it really flies in the face of the academic research that's out there. So I think the reality is we cannot kick this can down the road. It's great that we're getting the federal dollars again, but we have to think strategically and be smart moving forward so we're not back in this same situation. The legislature recognizes this. The governor certainly has recognized this in noting that, we have large out-year gaps that we need to address. So, reforming our tax structure right now makes sense, and it's the right thing to do. So we're here supporting the Assembly and Senate in their one house proposals, and we want to see those in the final budget.